Chapter 17. You may be going north, Josephine told her brother, and all these men may choose to follow you. I am going west. Maine stared at her for a moment, before stepping towards her. You were broken by coming with me, Joey, he told her, frowning. I didn't get you out of that place only for you to get put back in another. He looked up to Druce, who widened his eyes as much as to say, leave me out of it. But Josephine was having none of it and, in over-large boots she had swiped from the laundry, proceeded to walk in the direction of the main road to Erfurt. From there, Frankfurt, or Stuttgart, and, she broke off, looking between Paddy and Henry. I saw what happened to two of them in a broken basso, or SAS, perhaps. I could neither recognize, nor hope to tell, who they were. One had been beaten so hard his backbones and ribs were showing a broken bar. Another, Josephine turned her head west, had been hung, not hanged, over a fire, burnt to death. She shot a quick look at Druce. One of those could have been you, Henry. Druce put his hand on her forearm gently. And we could have been 1 day later with the German resistance, and found you and Major Sterling similarly expired. He glanced across to Paddy. Main progress to prevent this, and to rescue those who are, perhaps, still alive, is in place. Henry dipped his head and drew his face towards her. Paddy thought he was about to kiss Josephine, but whispered something in her ear. She brightened, the smile Paddy remembered, like warm summer sun on a high-pressure day in June, radiated from her face, and Paddy realized, like the SAS, units of two lots of two were arranged to prevent hierarchy, and the cell of two became closer even than lovers, so much time they had to spend in each other's company. Gallet scene? Josephine repeated, and Henry nodded. North, then, Paddy told them. There were 6 of them now, with a new objective. Or your own home runs back to GHQ. I have to get Sterling out, Josephine insisted. I have not completed what I set out to do. She looked, contemplatively, at the high castle on its rocky promontory. From there it looked like a castle out of a fairy tale. White Section-8, red tiled roof. No need, came a voice behind them. Out of the dawnlight strode the 6-foot-5-inch frame of Major Archibald David Sterling. Colonel Sterling, I've been told to tell you, Paddy Main replied. And then there were 7, and they were going north. 88,888,888. They took the coal and timber barges from where they were moored under the Muldborough 1/4, rubbing coal grime about their faces and shouldering the waterproof cloaks the German resistance had supplied. The current drifted them the 10 miles north to Grimma. Only a mild punt needed to steer the large, flat-bedded goods boats on. Paddy, Armands, Sterling and Kershaw in one, Druce, Reg Seekings and Josephine in the other. The pale light of dawn had given way to a warm, autumn glow and, thought Josephine, considering the battle at Colditz Castle that night and, with random gunshots and artillery fire glancing off stone still being heard, they had yet to be confronted with German patrols. Which, she thought, could mean they were passing for what they intended, working class, manual laborers. Or, someone had seen them and ordered hands off. Once or twice, a wave came from the bank. Someone waved back, Kershaw, or Armands, and Josephine watched as she helped to steer their barge around a gentle set of rapids to small wisps of smoke heading heavenwards. Resistance, perhaps, or tiny settlements, charcoal burners. They were in timber country. They got out when they got to Grimma, leaving the barges buried, and the waxed overcoats. Paddy led the way so that his group of 4 kept ahead, and she, Druce and Armands a little further back. They stopped regularly, particularly when a small brigade of German soldiers passed a little further away heading towards the town and the river. Death to them all, Josephine knew, if they were caught. As her other brother had declared. This way, Paddy told them, as they moved along country lanes not dissimilar to those in between the villages in Perthshire, a kind of shale and mudstone, with tall evergreens and brambles. Josephine looked across to Sterling, and wondered if he thought that too. She watched him move to the center of the 4, Sterling's own idea of which he was now an intrinsic part, his pace steady but wary. North, Josephine considered, yet it felt to her they were going west. And, as the ground gave to a slope downwards to a slight valley, the tower of the famous St. Thomas's Cathedral against the skyline. J.S. Bach was buried in that cathedral, Kershaw commented, as they picked up the pace. Weapons stowed in the barges were now in their hands lest they meet opposition, but, so far, in the empty woodland and scrub, nothing was obvious. He started to hum a part of a concerto, one which Josephine recognized, and then where from, and was less delighted. William Joyce had played this before a broadcast. She clutched her pistol, a German Luger stolen from the guard on the SAS's retreat, as Paddy held up a hand. Her brother looked at Josephine's face as they slunk into the scrub and gorse. She was bruised, a dark crescent shadowing her cheek, but her posture was unbroken, confident even. He noted the subtle line of her jaw, the way her hands stayed loose, alert but not hiding. But it was impossible to ignore the way Sterling's gaze kept flicking to her, glances too quick to be looks of gratitude. A broken bar, a half step closer than necessary, a broken bar, the faint catch in his breath when she adjusted her pack. Josephine noticed. He saw it. Both aware, both resisting, yet neither could fully step back. She had saved him, manipulated the enemy, and guided him to safety, and yet, there was no warmth in her smile, only the faintest edge of challenge, the unspoken dare. A broken bar, you're mine in this moment, but never trust me. A broken bar. The two groups moved on when no danger presented itself to the Sterling said quietly, leaning slightly to her as they passed a broken fence. I should hate you for this. For everything you've done. A broken bar, and yet a broken bar. Josephine didn't answer. She let his words hang in the air, let the frost-laden silence stretch, measured a broken bar taut. Paddy noticed Druce sidle carefully towards her and caught the flicker of tension between the two men, the almost imperceptible tilt of Josephine's shoulder, the way Sterling's hand brushed against hers for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. She moved it away and her small fingers brushed those of Henry Druce. Ahead of them, the forest opened onto a small clearing where Druce then pulled Josephine and Armans to him. Paddy had appraised Henry Druce of the plan. Leipzig was the furthest north they were going, for there was one person, potentially two, to locate. He watched as Josephine and Armans nodded, and debriefed his own three. Once done, they reformed. Maine counted heads, confirmed their positions, then gave a silent nod. All clear. Moved to the exit routes. Josephine and Sterling exchanged another look before separating, her group moving behind Paddy's. Maine kept the formation tight, his eyes scanning, but kept his back eye on David Sterling. He had seen many things on operations, even buggery, but he had never seen Sterling like this, so alert, so tense, alive in a way that wasn't just strategy, but entirely human. Josephine had caused that in him, something Eve Mansour had never invoked. The extraction point was in the very center of Leipzig. On the way, washing lines were plundered, old clothes burned. Paddy was heartened to see Druce holding up a large sheet with Josephine between it and a concrete wall. What remained of the silk dress at her feet before stepping out of it and into rough linen trousers, a laborer's shirt and boots. She tied her hair in a loop and pushed a flat cap on top, before blackening her face with coal as the others did. A workman's furnace raged in that mid-afternoon light, and as they passed, all seven of them threw in whatever clothing it would not be prudent to be found with, or indeed found at all, into the fire. Hungry flames consumed the garments, reaching out with energetic hands for all that was offered. By the time they reached the extraction point, the SAS and Josephine were moving in unison, a precarious blend of professionalism, tension, and unspoken emotion. Maine knew the danger was far from over, for the cathedral's afternoon service would be underway. 88,888,888. The deception was quick and definite. Two workmen, nodding to the Mesner and explaining in low-class speech they were here to mend the glass in the window above the altar, were shown inside and up a spiral set of stairs. Two others, a man and a woman, circulated post-service, and knelt by one another on the upper seating, hands in one another's. To any onlooker they may appear to be two people giving thanks for the survival of loved ones. The man, classically educated, recited the Lord's Prayer in Old English. We were in Saxony, after all, Druce later told Josephine, when she asked him. Another man was inspecting the Bach organ, looking over the notes and keys carefully, clearly a tourist for the attention he was taking. The chorister noticed and headed towards the organ to see if he could be of any help, and two others, unseen, scaled the inner curtain wall of the tower, using the conveniently placed copper rivets that held the radio transmitter wire to the earth. Stretching to the bell tower, Paddy Mayne and David Sterling hauled themselves up, silently, and waited. 88,888,888. You know, the words bell and belfry aren't really related, Jim Armand told Reg Seeking as they waited by an almost replica of the radio at Colditz's chapel. He glanced out of the window. A broken bar. What minds there would be, working in the university, making new music, perhaps, for Dave Kershaw to love, or working out equations for new machinery. He wished he had been born into a family that could have allowed him to get to university. Instead, money was needed, so a job was needed. But he tried to read all he could. Is that so? A huge bell hung in the center, unusual to be spared when so many bells had been sent to scrap graveyards and melted down. No one was coming yet, and so, to make it seem as if they were repairing the stained glass, they repaired the stained glass. Yes, Armands told him, handing him some lead. He molded it with his fingers and pressed it into one of the gaps. Though a Lutheran cathedral, and indeed, Martin Luther had come to rededicate it himself, the old glass was not condemned. As such, it was maintained. The French had a word for tower, a belfry, which, over time, got associated with bells, so, sh. Interrupted Seekings. He turned to where he could hear a scrabbling noise and held up a hand. Armands, who was facing the window, turned. I was only saying, he cut off when Seekings held up his hand more vehemently. Then Jim could hear it, and turned, pushing away the lead putty and reaching for his MG42. 88,888,888. A figure moved through the nave below, as Joseph Ibe and Henry Druce continued to hold hands in prayer. A glance was enough, his silhouette a recognizable slenderness. There was no mistaking his frame, the angle of his head, no mistaking his intention. The time for why came later. Josephine dropped Henry's hands and reached for her pistol, watching William Joyce walk with purpose towards the belfry's door. A few exchanged words with the verger with whom Armands and Seekings had spoken, and her brother's hand was heading towards the handle. Henry, too, was watching him now, her loosing of his hand an alert to, what? Josephine pointed. Once she knew, it was obvious. His walk a broken bar, a rhythmic, silent confidence that didn't belong to a church layperson. A broken bar. How he held his head. John Francis O'Reilly, she whispered in exclamation to Henry Druce as they knelt in the upper pews. O'Reilly, the Irishman who had played a game so long and so crooked it had spiraled into spook legend, climbed the spiral stairs toward their loft. To the Germans, he had been an interrogator in Colditz, a man of the Abwehr who had done his damnedest to break Sterling. He had, ostensibly, parachuted back in Ireland as an excuse to flee the Reich, pretending to be in awe of Rudolf Hess's exploit to Scotland. Up a broken bar up the tower, to the glass repairers, to use the radio once again. A broken bar up in the pews. Josephine stood, and began to make her way down the steps. She had to warn them. A broken bar. She had seen the papers and that he had made a landing in County Clara. Broken bar. Milo, to double-cross. Come in, O'Reilly began, and stopped. 4 pairs of eyes were on him. 5 minutes and all was clear, despite Sterling's will to smash his face in for the beatings he has endured. Holding back, he allowed O'Reilly to explain how he had used GHQ and SAW radio contacts on a different frequency to those Eve Mansour betrayed. I had to throw my trail cold, O'Reilly added, because I got too close. He nearly found out. O'Reilly grinned at O'Reilly. She really got in trouble with Joyce that night, Sterling, O'Reilly continued. When all he got in response was a granite-like stare, he added, when you turned Joyce's messages on himself. I was piggybacking the transmissions with my own messages. Back to London, a broken bar, Hukuisa broken bar, she's just a Horea broken bar, he broke off when Sterling lunged for his throat, pinning him to the wall of the belfry. The height is just level with the university tower, Jim Armands told them, knowledgeably. The fellow must have been relaying the signals from Colditz to Leipzig, the broken bar, all the way up to Berlin. Paddy Mayne allowed Sterling to get as far as reddening the man's face and then yelled at his former CO to stop. Unfortunately for you, Paddy translated, there are people who do care a broken bar about her. The only reason that I didn't let Major Sterling here finish the job is because he broken bar. Unfortunately for us, your work is probably too valuable for the Allies. He need O'Reilly in the testes, and the reason I haven't killed you is because he stabbed his index finger in O'Reilly's direction, is that you are a fellow Irishman. O'Reilly crawled across the wooden floorboards and used the palm of his hands to pull himself up to his feet, exquisite pain radiating out from his groin. 88,888,888 in the cathedral, another figure was striding, pistol in hand. His figure would also be unmistakable, should Josephine have seen the arrogant, entitled gait, the hold of his jaw, the wide, diagonal scar across his right cheek. Instead, the door to the belfry had swung closed before either her or Druce had got there. Above, from the door at the top, by the harsh, metallic snap of a pistol slid. He smiled, which made the scar, earned in a pub knife fight in London's East End, look even more gruesome. O'Reilly, William Joyce intoned, pointing the pistol at his former radio broadcaster. When the Funk's PAL stopped, when the Rye had stopped catching agents a broken bar, we knew the radio games had been compromised. Joyce shook his head, scoldingly, and held the Luger with two shaking hands. He leveled the gun at Sterling, his finger tightening, remembering the cold, heavy feeling of the spoof broadcast. The SAS men shifted, a collective of coiled violence, Mayne, Seekings, Armands, and Gershaw moving to flank. Downstairs, whispers began between the clergy. Druce, who was heading to the belfry door, was pulled back by Josephine. There's an air raid, I heard the verger speak to the choir master. They looked at the belfry door, then Henry followed its inside wall with his eye. They raced to the door embedded in the wall. Josephine pulled open the wooden panel and Druce pulled on the bell rope. 200 feet above then, Gloriosa, saved from scrap, swung. The standoff of drawn weapons tipped in the favor of the SAS as the huge bell swung. It struck Joyce in the face. He toppled back, the German pistol skittering across the belfry's stone. Paddy kicked him hard in the face as Sterling grabbed Joyce, and thumped him in the stomach. However, the 500-year-old bell did not stop ringing. On the contrary, there was a change in the air. Then the heavy, rhythmic thrum of Lancasters saturated the air. A scream of falling ordnance tumbled from the sky, hitting the square inches front of the cathedral, punching a hole into the medieval cobbles which flew up into the air. A concussive force shattered the cathedral's lower windows and sent a plume of masonry dust roaring up the belfry shaft. The building groaned, the Gloriana vibrating with a low, mournful hum as the floor tilted. In the chaos of the shaking earth and the blinding dust, the German guards below broke formation, their panicked shouts lost to the thunder of the explosions. Go! Mayne roared over the din as Joyce staggered on the floor. He fired blindly, the round ricocheting off the iron bell with a deafening clang that masked his position. He turned to flee, disappearing into the swirling grey fog of the collapsing loft. The SAS moved to hunt him through the ruins, but the raid had turned the cathedral into labyrinthine falling timber and fire. The German garrison was pouring out into the streets, a frantic swarm of grey uniforms lit by the orange glow of the burning city. There was no time to track a single rat through the cellar of a dying Reich. Leave him to the rubble, Sterling shouted, grabbing O'Reilly by the shoulder. The transmitter is dead. Armands took the other shoulder as a bomb dropped a few hundred yards away. We will deal with Joyce. Are you transmitting through the university? John O'Reilly nodded. Then go. save yourself," Paddy told him, pushing him towards the belfry stairs. O'Reilly began to move, but Paddy caught his shoulder again. "You probably saved Joey's life," he conceded. "But don't ever talk about my sister like that again." He tightened his grip. O'Reilly paused, then nodded. They were down in the cathedral, Reg Seekings told Paddy, as he watched his comrade dart his head around the cathedral square. Joyce was now slumped on the stone floor. If the tower, Sterling kicked him for good measure in the ribs, then twice more in the head. "Leave him," Paddy instructed, then half fell, half ran down the stairs. The other two SAS men followed him. Paddy stopped when he realized Sterling was not there with them. He pushed back past Armands and Seekings, as another piece of masonry tumbled from the church tower. "And they said they'd avoided Leipzig with our bombers because it was a cultural center." Jim shook his head. Paddy found Sterling still striking an unconscious Joyce. The anger in the man made Maine wonder its cause. "Come on, the place is a death trap." "Death for him, after what he put your sister through," Sterling retorted, and kicked Joyce in the face. "Now, you contrary sod." Paddy jolted his arm. "We have to get out of here." O'Reilly had the right idea. O'Reilly probably knew about there. Sterling broke off. He was about to add, "raid," but it was obvious. Of course he had been involved in it, somehow. Sterling cast one more foul look over William Joyce's unconscious form. "Come on, I need to find Joey." Paddy sensed that his sister had been on Sterling's mind too, for, at the mention of her name, he jolted, and followed him. In the cathedral there was chaos. A fire had started where out of a shell had hit the front gable door. The ceiling had cracked near the J.S. Bach organ, and Dave Kershaw was shaking his head, ruefully. "Never mind the sodding organ, Kershaw," scolded Paddy Maine. "Have you seen my sister or Druce?" Kershaw shook his head. Outside, more bombs fell into firelit streets. In the belfry, the man who had cast German propaganda over the last 2 years opened his eyes, chancing he could stop playing dead. With immense pain in his torso, William Joyce hit the stairs of the tower, tumbling down them before herring off into the city. 88,888,888. In the quiet, antiseptic stillness of the university hospital, Josephine Maine watched the dust particles dance in the pale German sunlight. Her leg was bandaged. A dull, throbbing ache radiated up from her knee. Henry Druce sat by her bed. His large, capable hands held a small glass of water. Josephine tried. Druce put his finger to his lips. "O'Reilly," he told her, simply. "Contacts here have made you stable. A large lump of rock fell on your leg." He held out his hand with the glass in it. She took it, trying to sit up, then coughed on the liquid. He put an arm behind her shoulders. Robbie? Druce didn't know whether that was a question or a statement, but he turned where Josephine was looking anyway, and was heartened to see the huge Irishman, who had appeared in the doorway. He walked to the foot of the bed and kicked the frame gently. Joey smiled through dry, cracked lips. "O'Reilly came through. Milo has organized a pickup this evening over at Markleeburg." He paused, his gaze lingering on the way Henry's hand lingered near Josephine's on the white linen. "We go in an hour, whether you can walk or not." "Everyone?" Paddy nodded. "London. Clark will want to speak to you."